Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Generative AI is the source of a lot of angst for students, for workers, for artists. We'll talk to Bellevue-based science fiction writer Ted Chiang about how he thinks about it as a writer in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. King County has launched a new 24/7 confidential hotline for people to report hate crimes. Callers can get connected with victim support services and assistance in reporting the crime to police. It's run by the nonprofit Crisis Connections. Callers can report anonymously and will have access to interpretation services in more than 200 languages. The number is 833-786-7481. Election season is in full swing, and KUOW is hosting several debates this week. First up, the candidates for Seattle City Council Position 9, incumbent Sarah Nelson and challenger Dion Foster. It'll air at noon tomorrow on KUOW's midday program, Soundside. And check back with us on Saturday, as we'll be airing these debates leading up to the November election. Clergy members in Washington won't be required to report child abuse to law enforcement if the information is learned during a confession. That is the result of a new settlement between Washington State and the Seattle Archdiocese. State lawmakers passed a law this year that would have required clergy members to report abuse even if it came during confession. The Seattle Archdiocese then sued, arguing religious discrimination. Today's settlement still requires clergy members to be mandatory reporters, joining teachers, doctors, and many other professions. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. When AI can generate screenplays, novels, podcasts, even significant others, it raises questions around the role humans can play when they're competing with machines. This is something that Bellevue-based sci-fi writer Ted Chiang has thought a lot about. He's the author of several award-winning short story collections, including Exhalation. He also wrote The Story of Your Life, which was the basis of the 2016 film Arrival. He says we're getting too accustomed to interactions where humans are an afterthought. Ted Chiang, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So you've written a lot about AI and your concerns as it gets more widely adopted. What are you most concerned about when it comes to AI?
I think the risk is that humans are disappearing, that we are sort of training ourselves to not expect human interaction. We are sort of reinforcing a kind of bubble that all of us exist in. So, we are losing one of the essential aspects of living in a society, the fact that we are ideally supposed to be in constant interaction with one another.
Does that inform your relationship with AI in your personal life? Do you intentionally separate from AI?
I sometimes describe myself as an LLM vegan because even though I'm not an actual vegan, I think that it's a useful comparison because I think many vegans, they don't eat meat because eating meat kind of grosses them out. It makes them feel complicit in a crime. And I feel the same way about LLMs because, when I think about the environmental harm and the labor exploitation and the IP theft, the idea of using generative AI kind of grosses me out. But even apart from that, like if we were to imagine some hypothetical ethically created LLM, something that was energy efficient and didn't involve labor exploitation and was only trained on public domain work, I'm not sure I would use it then. I guess I'd be open to trying it, but I don't know that I would use it because I just don't see how it would fit into my creative process or any of the things that I want from using a computer.
All right, let's talk about large language models and art. You're a writer, and you've given a lot of thought to this. You wrote in The New Yorker, you said that one thing that separates an artist from someone using ChatGPT is the number of choices being made. And I really appreciated that because I think it speaks to art as something that is personal to the artist. But I want to hear more about what you meant by that.
I think of art as a concentrated form of intention. When you are making art, you are being intentional about every single aspect of the work. And I think this is true not just of art, but also of just doing good work in general. When people are doing really good work, they are being careful and attentive to every aspect of what they are doing. So I think that is true of good work in general. It is, I think, particularly true of art. And I think that that is fundamentally incompatible with how generative AI works, because generative AI is all about small inputs and large outputs. That's what the generative means. And when you have small inputs and large outputs, that pretty much means that you are not being intentional about every aspect of the output. There is simply no way for you to put all of your intention to specify all the things that need to be specified when making art if you are using generative AI. If it is doing any generative work, then you have abdicated your role as making choices and being intentional about the work. I don't think those two really go together, art and generative AI.
Let's talk about distinction in types of writing. You cited computer scientist Anna Rogers talking about making the distinction between writing as thinking and writing as nuisance. Can you talk about the difference?
So, if you're a writer, it is probably pretty clear to you what these two categories mean. Because if you're a writer, there is the writing that you do because there's something that you want to say, or there is something that you are trying to figure out, and writing will help you figure out what you think about a subject. A lot of writers will say that they don't know exactly what they are thinking until they are able to articulate it into a piece of writing. So that is writing as thinking. Writing as nuisance is all the types of writing that we are sort of forced to do because we are embedded in this sort of bureaucracy. And so there's just a lot of overhead. There's just a lot of housekeeping, a lot of text that we are forced to generate simply to exist in the modern world. And that's a chore that we would mostly want to be free of if we could be. And so, one of the appeals of LLMs is that they might be able to take over the nuisance writing that we are forced to do. And assuming that LLMs could do that well, that might be an acceptable use for them. But the problem is that if, as we normalize the use of LLMs for this sort of nuisance writing, all we are doing is expanding the systemic requirements for nuisance text. Because, once it becomes easy to generate a 10-page document which has essentially no content, then we're just going to be encouraging institutions placing these requirements like, okay, now at a minimum, generate a 10-page document. And I think those requirements will simply expand over time because LLMs will sort of reinforce this expectation. But I think what all of us would actually prefer is if we could reduce these requirements to just the bare minimum. That is what we would actually want. And again, LMs are sort of pushing us in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm. What is the threat of muddying writing as thinking and writing as nuisance?
The risk is that we are lowering our expectations of what writing is. As a reader, what you are looking for is writing as thinking. You want to read something which conveys what the writer is trying to say and what they have worked out, what they have thought when they have considered some issue. But the more that our world sort of expects people to generate boilerplate text, large documents with very little actual thought that went into them, we as readers become conditioned to thinking of text as being, mostly content free. we start to expect that the documents we read will have only the slightest bit of intention in them. And so, that is a lowering of our expectations of what we read. The risk is that we are kind of racing to the bottom where all text becomes something just barely above boilerplate.
I'm worried about this, especially with students right now, because for people learning how to write, learning how to do things that are hard, it can all feel like a nuisance. How do you think about young people trying to navigate this?
So students who have to write assignments, they're in this odd situation where they view their assignments as a kind of nuisance. But but the point of assignments is to train them in the process of writing as thinking. And there is this sort of mismatch going on. And what I've said in the past is that if you are a student at a university, you should think of yourself as an athlete in training. You don't know what sport you're going to compete in, and your professors don't know what sport you're going to compete in. But what they do know is that you will need strength training. And so that is what essay writing is. They are strength training exercises. So, yeah, using ChatGPT to complete your assignments, it's like bringing a forklift into the weight room. Uh, you are not going to develop your cognitive strength that way. And it's especially hard now because people are getting the message that AI will be able to do whatever that a person can do. And so it's natural for a young person to think like, why should I even bother? What is the point of this? I should say that, I don't think that AI is going to be able to do what a person can do anytime soon. So I think that is just a sales pitch. But a lot of people are accepting this sales pitch at face value. And the fact that so many people are accepting this sales pitch at face value is having a very destructive effect on young people and their motivation to learn because education is hard enough as it is.
That's a depressing message, Ted. That I mean, I can't imagine what it must feel like to be a young person who thinks, "Hey, I'm not going to have to think about any of this stuff." I'm not sure how what kind of world that leads to on some levels. Learning is uncomfortable, but we've also talked about how important friction is in learning.
So I do not believe that AI will be able to do the things that a person can do. The risk is people believing that. And so I think what we need to do is push back against that sales pitch. We need to remind people that there are plenty of things that people can do which AI cannot do. And those are the most valuable things, and they are worth pursuing. But it's not going to be easy because we are, sort of trying to push against a sales pitch being made by trillion-dollar companies.
Another distinction you've written about is the one between skill versus intelligence. What's the difference between the two, and why is that important?
This is a distinction made by the computer scientist Francois Chollet. And he says, skill is how well you do at a task, and intelligence is how rapidly you gain new skills. And this is a useful distinction because it helps us distinguish between what it is that computers do and what it is that humans are good at. There are chess programs which can beat any human grandmaster, but those chess programs needed to play 10 million games to get that good. No human chess player has ever played 10 million games. And grandmasters become grandmasters with playing somewhere, in the neighborhood of thousands of games. But, it's precisely humans' ability to rapidly adapt to new situations that sets us apart. You can drop a human being into an unfamiliar situation and they will figure things out. they will not need 10 million trials before they can, navigate that situation well. And this is why, human drivers are good at driving because even, if you have never encountered a certain situation before, you will handle it competently. You might never have seen a semi truck flipped over, but if you encounter one, you will not simply ram into it. And, I think this is also why AI is not going to be able to take over human jobs because in most jobs, a person will regularly encounter situations that they had not encountered before, that were not explicitly laid out in, the training or whatever. And a good employee will figure it out. And that is why we have human employees. That is what we want from human employees. The fact that they can competently navigate new situations.
This all feels like an uphill battle, Ted Chiang. The rush to adopt AI feels very real. How do we argue for these things you're talking about? Ultimately, why does intention matter?
And why does intention matter? Why do we think there's a difference between someone who lies and someone who tells the truth? Intention is the fundamental underpinning of genuine human interaction. We're not just cogs in a machine. And even though, capitalism would try and have us believe that we are nothing more than cogs in a machine, we can be more than that. We should be more than that. Prior to capitalism, we were more than that. And that is something that we have to struggle to retain in this modern era.
Yeah. And I guess we'll all have to make choices. We'll have to make choices about who we're going to be in all this. You tired, Ted? These are big questions. This is a lot of mental work we did here.
Well, yeah, we're getting into some heavy stuff.
Yeah. No, I do appreciate you taking the time and thinking through this with us for our listeners. Really appreciate it. Ted Chiang, award-winning sci-fi author. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez and Shane Mailing. It was edited by Andy Hurst and Vaughn Jones. Our production team also includes Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.